Hello and welcome back to our short lecture series on how to write an EcoS term paper or master's thesis. Today I will talk about some formal aspects. So first of all, I will have a few remarks on why form actually matters to make sure that you understand why this is actually important and not just a formality. And then I will go through a single criteria in our grading form. So why does it matter? Number one, if you standardize formal requirements, it means that it becomes easier to focus on the contents because all these formal things are standardized. I'm talking about, for example, citation or the very convention of academic writing. So that is one aspect that I think is important. The other one is more pragmatic in terms of marketing. It's like you package your product, to make it look, well, nice is perhaps the wrong term, but to make it look attractive to a potential client, right? And in a way, academic writing means producing something, and this product is produced for other people, right? Unless you write just strictly for yourself. So whatever you produce for somebody else, you have, of course, the product with all its inherent characteristics, but also the way how it is presented. And form also plays a major role in this regard. And then the final point on this slide is something that I've mentioned several times already in previous short lectures on this topic of writing EcoS term papers and master's thesis, and this is trust. Trust, kind of summarizing the image that people have of you as an author, right? The human mind is as it is and usually tries to second guess the unknown, like things that we do not know exactly by looking at what we do know, right? That's a very simple strategy that we apply. And in our case, it means that the publication that is well formatted kind of indicates that also the contents is good, like high academic quality, right? So we do know that such an assumption doesn't always have to be correct. You can have a very nicely formatted paper that is absolutely worthless. But that's the problem, with this kind of heuristic. It's not always leading to the perfect result. Still, people like to stick to it. So if something does not look good, and that's what I mean by vice versa, we usually conclude that also the contents is kind of inferior. And that is, of course, the thing that we really want to avoid. I'm not trying to encourage you to nicely package a bad product. What I want to do is to discourage you from badly packaging a very good product. Look, you spent all this time and energy into writing your term paper, master's thesis, or whatever you are going to write in the future, right? I don't want to say heart blood, that sounds too emotional, but sometimes that's actually what it is, right? You really invest into this product and you want people to receive it positively, right? You want your writing to achieve a certain goal. You want people to benefit from it. You want to convince people by what you have written. And, it would be such a shame and tragedy if you would not reach your goal simply because people don't think it has been formatted right. And then they automatically conclude, if there's chaos in formatting, there must also be chaos in the mind of the author, and then they lose their trust in you. And this is really something that you should really, really prevent by all means. And that's why I am stressing this point, and I can only say whether you like this aspect of human psychology or not, that's not the question here. It is what it is, and we have to take it into consideration. It is part of our operating environment. And therefore, I think it is really important to keep reminding you of those allegedly minor formal issues. Well, on one hand they are, on the other they are not. Okay, so what do we have in terms of single issues here that I have outlined also on the grading form that I will show you on the final page? First of all, there's a cover page. Now, for a master's thesis at the University of Vienna, there is a standardized cover page that you must use, so there is no flexibility here and also no chance to really screw up, because actually your thesis will not be accepted if the cover page does not comply with the standards that have been set by the university. But actually, you should have a standard page, or a cover page, sorry, for all of your submissions, including term papers, but that goes to smaller assignments that you have to complete, written assignments for single courses. Because very often actually I receive such written assignments and don't even know what course they are related to, because students don't enter this kind of information. It really doesn't look good if you submit a paper without a cover page and so on. So really make that a habit, even if it's just a 2 or 3 page assignment, especially if it's an electronic version, so you don't even waste a paper or something. It's just a few bits or bytes extra, so that could be done easily without even harming the environment. Okay. What should be on the cover page, again, our mantra is form follows function. So basically we talk about information that is useful for the person who receives the document, and these are the things that this person, including myself, would like to know. So first of all, who is the one who is submitting something? That is your name and also your student ID, in order to help us identify you precisely. There might be people with a similar name. The title of the course for which the submission is made in the case of a term paper, or of course of the master's program in case of a master's thesis, right? And also don't forget to include the term for which you submit. You know, sometimes materials, they get mixed up, and we keep teaching, we repeat the same courses in about an annual cycle, and we want to make sure that we understand you are participating in the winter term 2021 and not in the winter term 1920 or something. So add that also to your front page. The title of the work you are submitting, you know, you could say assignment 4 or literature review on topic whatever for this in this course, or then again you call it master's thesis, and then you provide the title of your master's thesis, and so on and so on. Then the type of work you are submitting, right? Is it a term paper? Is it an essay? Is it a report? And finally, the date of submission. So if all this information is on the cover page, then you're fine. The volume, like the page numbers or number of words, etc. I tried to apply this form follows function paradigm here as well, by telling students, look, as many pages as necessary, in order to, you know, answer your research question appropriately and so on. That didn't really work very well. I tried to appeal to my students' common sense, and well, I don't want to say I failed, but it was just we had different ideas. Let me put it this way, what that should mean. So the results were not satisfactory, and that's why we have created the following rules, as you can see them here on the slide. So for a term paper, it should be roughly 10,000 words of main text. Main text means anything starting from the first word of the introduction to the final word of the conclusion. It means it does not include the table of contents. It does not include the list of references, for example. And then we have plus minus 500 words, because it's sometimes really difficult to hit exactly those 10,000. Then I will start deducting points if you are above or below 10,000 plus minus 500. 1 point will be deducted for every 500 words above or below this threshold. And well, do the math yourself. If you see especially if you see the grading form later on, that means that term papers with less than 8,000 or more than 12,000 words will simply not be accepted and will be graded with a 5 or F, depending on what grading system you use to think in. In a master's thesis, we have no upper limit, but there is a minimum of 35,000 words with the same limitations applying here. If your term paper is too long, master's thesis cannot be too long. If you want to write 400 pages, you are free to do so. It's not like I would really appreciate if everybody would do that, and I would actually try to advise you not to do it, because you need to limit the amount of work you invest into this, also, you know, in your own interest. But in principle, that would be fine. But for a term paper, there is a limit, and if you write and suddenly find out, oh my God, I have 2,000 words too many, then of course you should go back to your paper and try to cut it. Sometimes less is actually more. Sometimes it will even improve your argument if you try to limit yourself to really the core and main ideas. If you reformulate in a more stringent way so that people can better see the core of your argument. But if that doesn't work, there are also tricks like, for example, you can move charts or long direct citations into an appendix. Like, I'm not talking about the paragraph of a direct citation, but for example, if you're citing a document or a law or something and that has 2 or 3 pages, you shouldn't include that. If you are over those 10,000 words, you shouldn't include it in the main text, but actually put it in the appendix and then just refer to it. And that is also a way how you can save words. So there are ways of handling this, and let me just repeat, sometimes less is more, and being forced to be a bit more precise is not such a bad thing. And on a side note, for those of you who intend to become scholars and stay in the academic world, this 10,000 words is a relatively standard limit for academic articles, for articles in academic journals. Some journals have an 8,000 word limit, but roughly 10,000 is something that you should also expect in terms of requirement to you. And if you want to submit a journal article, you have to comply with those rules as well. So it's not a bad idea getting used to it early, developing kind of a feeling of how much space you still have, and learning how to keep things short and precise. Well, table of contents. Yeah, I know that you know what a table of contents is. Let me just add a few remarks here. I hope that you all know that there are automated functions for creating a table of contents, and also a list of tables and graphs and so on in standard word processing software like WinWord. You should also use the table of contents after you have written your thesis to check whether the numbering of the single parts is correct and complete, because I will certainly do that. And like in, let's say, 5% of all cases, I find that a section is missing, or actually it's not the section that's missing, but the numbering somehow got messed up. So you jump from 2.4 to 2.6, and then 2.5 isn't anywhere. And by looking at the table of contents, you can easily see that. Then you go to the text, find out what happened. So either you didn't mark it as a subheader, or you really have the numbers wrong, and then you can correct that. So that is one of the useful things here in the table of contents. And also, please include at least the first 3 levels of structure in your table of contents. That's down to the level of 1.1.1, for example, or 2.3.8, or whatever it is. Why? Because the table of contents gives the reader a chance to kind of understand the whole structure of your thesis. Remember the charts I've shown you with theoretical part, empirical part, analytical part, and in a way, as a reader, I want to see that, and other readers as well, what is actually there. And if you only have the first level, like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, that could perhaps be too little to actually understand the structure of your thesis. And understanding the structure of your thesis will help me reading it better, and also your other readers. Help me better to see, what is actually the main line of arguing, the logic, which points are you going to make. It also gives me kind of a preview of what to expect in later parts. So while I'm reading something and I feel like I miss it, I will look at a table of contents. I see, okay, that's coming up a few sections later, everything fine, and then I will continue reading, So that is also something that sometimes students do not perfectly write. Again, this depends a bit on your thesis itself. Sometimes 2 levels might be enough. Sometimes it might be a good idea to include 4 of them. Really, again, use your common sense and then make a decision. Form follows function. Let me just say that again. I love that sentence. Okay, the list of references is also known as the bibliography, or there might be some other names for it. Typically comes at the end of your paper or thesis, right after the conclusion. Yes, I know it sounds silly, but trust me, again, about 5% do manage not to sort their sources in alphabetic order. Please do that, okay? Alphabetic order usually means last name, and if there's no last name, of course, you also have to find a way to deal with it, but in principle, that's what we are talking about. Try to format your sources in a uniform way, like all sources formatted according to the same principle, and do not mix styles. Something that happens actually quite a lot And I understand this is just as you write, and especially for master's thesis, a relatively long process. So you start with one system, and then a few months later, you add a few other sources and you don't remember what you did like the month before, and then you use another one. But this is why before you submit your thesis, you have to have a critical review, right? And one of the classics is the first name is sometimes written in full, and sometimes it's also you only use italics, like Adam Smith in one case or A. Smith in another one, right? I'm not a big fan actually of those initials only. Some journals require that, but remember, form follows function. In that case, it helps those journals to save space, right? Because they do not just count your text, but of course also the list of references occupies space in a journal, and space means costs, because the more pages you print, the higher the costs are with your publisher. So there might be some kind of a logical justification or reason or thinking behind using just the acronym for the first name. But for your thesis, since the list of references doesn't count as part of the overall text, so there's no limitation, neither for a term paper nor for a master's thesis, I would actually like to see the full first names. That makes sense, especially if in that example it's a Mr. or Mrs. Smith. There are quite a few of them, and knowing the full first name still isn't a guarantee that you will be able to identify that person perfectly, but it will still make it more easier, or much easier. Or for names in East Asia, I don't know how many Lees or Kim or Park we have in Korea, right? Or in China, for that matter. Lee is also a very frequent name. So, we need not just the abbreviated version, but the full name. But in any case, whatever you do, keep it consistent. Same goes for the use of italics, use of dots or commas, and so on and so on. Well, you see the Chicago Manual of Style, something that I had already mentioned in the previous presentation. This is where you can actually get your kind of guidance how to apply all these things, including date of last access for online sources, or page numbers for journal articles. Sometimes they are lacking. So you provide me the name of the article, the actual journal, the volume and issue, and then somehow page numbers get lost. That's not a good idea. So after you have written all that, do a critical check of your own work to make sure that all this information is there and that it is included in the appropriate way. Well, yeah, again, orthography and grammar, that's of course self-evident. Just make sure to avoid this kind of errors, okay? As I just said when I talked about why we care about form, this is not trivial, right? It is about creating an image of yourself as an author, and you want that image to be positive and not sloppy or something. Now, in terms of how detailed my checking of the English grammar and orthography will be, look, as you might have guessed already from my nice German accent, I'm not a native speaker of English, okay? So I'm usually, when I'm in doubt, I usually think that maybe you're right and I'm wrong. If I find an error, it usually means it must be relatively severe, right, and grave. So yeah, I will not be too selective and picky in terms of grading orthography and grammar, but if you do make serious mistakes, this will definitely be, well, the opposite of rewarded, right? It will be punished. I do know that occasional errors occur. It's actually fascinating, like the books I've written. I mean, I don't know how many times I've read through them, and for the last books, since I published them at actual publishing houses with editors and a huge number of stuff, many people have been reading those books, and then you open it and the first thing you see is still another typo. This is really frustrating. It's just happening, okay? So if you have one error every 10 or 20 pages, that's still one too many, but it's not really something where I would start deducting points. But if there are too many of them, then you have a problem. What I typically do is I usually read those passages of your thesis or term papers where I think there is a maximum of yourself in there and not just quoting and paraphrasing others. I usually read those parts most closely in terms of, you know, searching for errors in orthography and grammar, and that would be the introduction and the final conclusion. And then I extrapolate. So if I find like 3, 4, 5 errors on one page, that would clearly be too much, and then I would start deducting points. So please take that seriously. If your own English isn't good enough, or if you at least believe your English isn't good enough, which might be two different things, well, then ask somebody else, okay? Get yourself help. Again, this is not just something you need to do at the university. Remember, we talk about marketing your product, and it's perfectly fine to get the help of someone who can do that better. Either you know a native speaker, or a friend of yours is just very good at English, and you know, maybe you can reciprocate by something else, or buying a cup of coffee, or I got no idea. Be creative, okay? Just take this seriously, please. Yeah, style. I think I have talked about this before, partly. So we have two aspects here. One is the formatting of your thesis. We talk about the margins and headings and so on. Please, if you submit a printed version, I don't want to see any coffee stains on the paper. That would be a real no-go. And the other style that I'm looking at is the style of language you use. What happens sometimes is that you use spoken language in written form. That is not a good idea. Then it's too much of a vernacular language. The tone style is too colloquial. That shouldn't really be in there. So when you write, you would, I think in every language, use a more formal style. So please do that for your term papers, master's thesis as well. I already mentioned also the neutral and objective tone when we talked about objectivity. You know, remember that we talked about other aspects of grading. Also, the avoidance of normative terminology is something that I had mentioned before. There is also something that, I don't know, some students do. I don't really know why. I have an example here. Famous Professor Smith wrote this and that. There are 2 words too many. Nobody wants to know whether he's famous, and nobody needs to know whether he or she is a professor, okay? As scholars, we would rather write according to Smith, and then we provide the short version of the source and page number. This and this has happened, or something. This is enough. No need to say according to famous, well-known and respected super professor Smith, this and this happened. This is just ridiculous. You know, that's the thing. It immediately makes you look like you're still somewhere in middle school, but you are actually here at the university in a master's program. So refrain from this, please. Be also careful to avoid phrases such as naturally. Sometimes it happens because I think it's, for some of us, it's part of our everyday spoken language. So you don't even perhaps notice that you use this, but when you write it, and if someone is using a different type of language, he or she will immediately notice that. And this is something that should be avoided. So unless something is really natural, then you just leave out the word naturally, right? And well, that's it. And of course, that applies to similar terms as well. Another problem is speaking of yourself. For good reasons, many authors shy away from the capital I, like I think, or I have found that this is the case, but you still want to emphasize that this is your opinion, so you use like this author thinks, or this author has found. Well, I think this sounds enormously odd. Yes, okay, this is a matter of taste, and I'm pretty sure I will not deduct any points if you use this kind of stuff. But I would clearly, I think, add a comment, because in 99% it's absolutely unnecessary and can be circumvented by just reformulating the very sentence. If you're not really sure how to do it, I mean, no problem. Just let me know. As your supervisor, I'm happy to help you, and that's not a big deal. So you know, you could say, oh, I tried to reformulate that sentence, I just don't know how to get rid of the capital I. Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to help you with this. But as a rule of thumb, really try to avoid that as much as possible, because to many ears, I've talked to many people about this, colleagues, peers, that just sounds very strange, and try to avoid it. Okay, now we have the final point, proper citation. I will not say much about this because I have actually included it in the previous presentation on other aspects. We just have moved this part from the contents to the form section of the grading form, but the criterion has not changed and the number of points that you receive has not changed, so it's actually pretty much the same thing. I just thought for completeness, you know, I include it here, but I will not discuss it any further. So this is our grading form for formal aspects. Altogether, you get 17 points out of 72. And frankly, you shouldn't really have less than, say, 16 points here, really. In a way, these are presents to you, right? I mean, you get points for having a cover page, right? I mean, isn't that ridiculous in a way? Yes, it is, but on the other hand, why not giving you something for free? And you wouldn't imagine how many people still refuse to accept that gift by messing up their cover page or leaving it out. Yeah, the volume stuff, well, this would be an example how grading for a master's thesis would look like. I actually do count those words, well, not manually, that would cost too much time, but there is software that can actually do this. So really, I mean, make sure to stay with the limit. Yeah, table of contents, page number, and so on and so on. I think it has all been explained already. Altogether 17 points. Well, that's it. So now you should know a bit more about what I expect in terms of formatting your term paper or master's thesis. Please take these things seriously, apply them, and boom, you already have 17 points out of 72 without even having really invested too much of your brain power. So isn't that fantastic? Well, anyway, thank you for your attention, and I will say goodbye for today, but not without a preview on some other presentations I'm also planning. I will have a short one on what a hypothesis is, and we also will have a few others on, for example, how to prepare a good presentation that doesn't really belong into the category of writing term papers and master's thesis, but the idea was that we slowly build up a database of more smaller videos to help you understand what you're expected to do in our program. So with this, or perhaps the next one, I will conclude this short series on term papers and master's thesis, but we will add more short videos on other aspects, and I really hope that you also will be interested in those. Thank you very much, and goodbye.